Dear viewers, this video is about something surprising that the United States has done. There are reports in diplomatic circles that the US has asked Japan and Australia to make their positions clear. Specifically, whether they would get involved if an incident were to occur in the Taiwan Strait. If something happens in the Taiwan Strait and the US military intervenes, would they participate as well? South Korea has said it would not participate, which has led to significant conflict between the US and South Korea. The United States said, if South Korea is so smart, then I'll just reduce the number of US troops stationed in South Korea and station more troops near the Taiwan Strait instead. The US policy is to go all in on the Taiwan Strait and ignore all other regions. Because Trump doesn't care about the democratic freedoms and rights of Taiwan's 23 million people. But he does care about TSMC, now that's truly Taiwan's national treasure. Without TSMC, I think the progress of AI worldwide would be set back by 10 years. Because right now, 90% of AI chips are made by TSMC. If TSMC were gone, and you had to build a new factory from scratch, even if you figured out how to do it, and some Taiwanese people started over to reach TSMC's scale, it would still take at least 10 years, no matter what. That's something the Trump administration simply can't tolerate. Recently, Colin Kahl, the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, held talks with defense officials from Japan and Australia, continuing to push forward, asking both countries to clearly state what role they would play if a war broke out between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. Let me explain this to everyone. Why are Japan and Australia so important? The only way to defeat Taiwan is through a blockade, cutting off Taiwan's fuel, supplies, and food. And to blockade Taiwan, you have to seal off the Miyako Strait to the north and the Bashi Channel to the south. The U.S. military would focus on blockading the Bashi Channel. As for the Miyako Strait in the north, it has to be blockaded by Japan because Japan has a chain of islands there. The closest Yonaguni Island is actually nearer to Taiwan than to China. As long as you deploy land-based anti-ship submarines and air defense submarines, there's no way to maintain a blockade because ships need to go out to refuel. Very quickly, after 10 or 20 days, if the ships can't return, you're done for. So, without Japan's participation, you simply can't blockade Taiwan. Why does Australia have to be involved? Because Australia serves as the main logistics base. Guam can be hit, but Darwin Port is out of range. A lot of the ship's resupply depends on Darwin Port. That's why Japan and Australia are so important in this strategic deployment. This demand caught both Tokyo and Canberra off guard. They said, America, you yourself haven't even committed to protecting Taiwan. People asked you, Trump, and you didn't promise to protect it either. You won't commit to protecting it yourself, but you want your allies to promise to do so. Are you serious? Elbridge Colby once served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense during Trump's first term. He's known for advocating that the U.S. should prioritize strategic competition with China. He became famous for shifting the focus away from the Middle East and Europe to Asia. Japan's Ministry of Defense responded that it's very hard to define what exactly constitutes a Taiwan contingency. You have to define it. What exactly is a Taiwan contingency? For example, if there's an invasion of the islands, like Kinmen, Matsu, or Dongsha, does that count as a contingency? If a missile is launched at Taiwan, does that count as a contingency? Any action, whenever Beijing does something, it has to be judged according to Japan's constitution, international law, and domestic legal regulations. It depends on each individual case and how serious the situation is. You can't just say it's a Taiwan contingency every time a Chinese vessel enters Taiwan's territorial waters. The Australian embassy in the U.S. declined to comment. Clearly, both countries are dissatisfied with the sudden pressure from the U.S. U.S. senators believe that there absolutely won't be a war in the next few years. Saying that China will achieve unification within 50 years, I think that's too optimistic. China will continue to probe, gather intelligence, and look for weaknesses. Just look at how the U.S. has responded to Iran and Ukraine, unification within 50 years. Republican member Wilson urges Taiwan to follow the examples of Ukraine and Israel. Fighting the strong with the weak, an asymmetric war. I think asymmetric warfare is all about air defense. The most important thing is defending against drones, especially guarding against traitors from within. That's the top priority. If you support Taiwan's Democratic Alliance for the Betterment, and many Taiwanese still support it, then there's no need to even fight. Seek peace through strength. On July 15th, the Japanese government released its annual defense white paper. It pointed out that the international community has entered a new era of crisis. This video segment mainly discusses the new defense white paper. It says this is the greatest challenge since World War II. Japan's security is being threatened, something that has never happened before. The white paper makes it clear China is the biggest strategic challenge. It points out that the global balance of power is undergoing a dramatic shift. What does a dramatic shift mean? It's obvious. China now has more warships than the United States. The US has to spread its forces all over the world, while China is focused on Taiwan and its surrounding areas. China has 3 aircraft carriers and has started building a 4th. This is all in preparation for blockading Taiwan. In terms of defense, Motegi and the White House have many unclear policies. The US Secretary of Defense reiterated America's commitment to the Indo-Pacific. He called on allies to raise their defense spending to 5% of GDP. The US hasn't done this, and Japan has always been peaceful, not even reaching 1%. Now, Japan is urgently allocating 2% of its GDP to defense spending. In 2022, they set a 5-year plan with a budget of 43 trillion yen. That's over 8 trillion yen per year. That's 56 billion US dollars a year, which is already impressive, 56 billion a year. By 2026, defense spending will reach 1.8%. Having over 50 billion is very significant. China's spending is over 200 billion US dollars, though that figure might be underestimated. That's over 200 billion US dollars, but Japan is on the defensive. They're on the defensive and separated by sea, making it extremely hard to attack. The white paper details how the Chinese military is increasing its activities around Japan, including around the Jiaoyu Islands. They go to the area around the Jiaoyu Islands every day. They've even extended beyond the first island chain, going to waters off Australia to conduct live-fire drills. In August last year, the Chinese military entered Japanese airspace for the first time. In September, an aircraft carrier and 2 naval vessels were moving back and forth between Japanese islands near Taiwan. Of course, this makes Japan very uneasy. And then, in 2024, Chinese Coast Guard ships entered the area near the Jiaoyu Islands on 355 days. In May, a Coast Guard ship launched a helicopter that violated Japanese airspace. In June, 2 Chinese aircraft carriers sailed in the Pacific at the same time for the first time. You know, the area west of Taiwan can be covered by the Air Force. So why blockade the east side of Taiwan? That's where aircraft carriers come in. This is part of the Area Denial Plan, Anti-Access and Area Denial Strategy. Because with aircraft carriers, American ships don't dare to enter this area. Otherwise, they'd be easily attacked by planes taking off from the carriers. This includes Japan's exclusive economic zone, which the Japanese side says is just routine training. Last week, Japan said that Chinese fighter jets were in the East China Sea. They were only 30 meters away from Japan's Air Self-Defense Force planes, just a moment away from a collision. China is willing to use dangerous maneuvers to force you back. If you're afraid of a collision, you'll have to move away. Japan has strongly demanded that China prevent similar incidents for the sake of security. The white paper analyzes that in 2024, China is conducting military exercises around Taiwan. Now the trend is getting more intense. After Lai Ching-te took office, they launched the Joint Sword 2024A military exercise. There are 3 main characteristics of Chinese military operations around Taiwan. The training is becoming more combat-oriented in preparation for actual warfare, with drills simulating real combat for a potential Taiwan contingency. There's also a focus on propaganda and normalization, I'll explain the importance of these three aspects to everyone. Combat-oriented training, like the Joint Sword exercise, specifically targets attacks on Taiwan's main harbors. They continuously conduct offshore drills on how to attack Kaohsiung, Taichung Port, and several other Taiwanese ports. They also practice how to blockade the Taiwan Strait and how the Coast Guard coordinates with military exercises to harass your ships. This is a simulated combat training program, and they have thoroughly practiced every part of it. This is called combat-oriented training. When war breaks out, they just execute the methods they've already practiced. There's also the propaganda aspect, where they show lots of military exercise footage and use 3D animation to create the effect of live-fire attacks. This puts pressure on Taiwan and the international community. It's an unlimited application of pressure. What does normalization mean? Normalization means they show up everywhere around you and then concentrate their troops. So you never know when they'll actually attack. You get used to their presence, and if they suddenly strike, you won't be able to defend yourself. Let me explain further. I used to say that if the PLA were going to attack Taiwan, you'd definitely know about it 6 months in advance. Attacking Taiwan requires gathering a huge number of troops and aircraft. About 70% of the country's forces, planes, ships, fuel, and ammunition all need to be deployed and ready. But now, it's not about needing 70% all at once. Instead, they're increasing by over 10% each year, gradually positioning these resources in offensive locations ahead of time. In the end, they could launch a sudden attack and then quickly add the remaining 20%, leaving you with no time to react or prepare. This becomes the daily norm, turning into an established fact. So, they can attack without any special preparations, and I hope that's clear to everyone. According to Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense, since September 2024, Chinese military aircraft have been entering the area around Taiwan, and you can see how the frequency has been rising like this. In 2023, 2024, and 2025, the increase has been much steeper compared to before. As for the Kuomintang, if you keep voting for them, it's basically like supporting the Taiwan United Front. Honestly, I have no idea what you're thinking, and Lai Ching-te needs to clearly explain what his strategy actually is. In the waters surrounding Taiwan, the number of confirmed Chinese naval vessels has increased. There were 1,900 ships in 2023. In the past, they didn't use naval vessels, but ever since Pelosi's visit, they've started deploying ships, and in recent years, they've been using them more and more. In 2024, it's up to 2,500 ships. There's no need to even talk about their military strength anymore. On land, their military has 960,000 troops compared to Taiwan's 90,000. They have 690 naval vessels, while Taiwan's are much smaller. It's simply not a fight we can win. Taiwan only has 4 submarines, while they have over 1,600 aircraft compared to Taiwan's 322. But Taiwan's F-16 versus are actually quite capable in combat. Taiwan is only now starting to ramp up, but what really needs to happen is training for civil defense, and also training people to form commando teams for raids. Right now, that kind of training just isn't happening. In August 2022, China fired 9 ballistic missiles, and 5 of them landed in Japan's exclusive economic zone. One of them landed during Pelosi's visit, and another landed 80 kilometers off Yonaguni Island. If China blockades Taiwan, they might use Coast Guard ships as the front line. Are Coast Guard ships considered military? If they carry out a blockade, the U.S. will have to hesitate, since it's not outright war. Should they intervene, or is it just a maritime security conflict? China might quickly shift from a Coast Guard blockade to military operations before the U.S. can intervene, using the pretext of law enforcement by the Coast Guard to lower the threshold for international military involvement, making it so you can't intervene. Since Coast Guard actions don't reach the level of military conflict, it's difficult for the U.S. military and Japan's self-defense forces to get involved. The self-defense forces believe that China is continuously escalating gray zone operations, which include maritime militias, tens of thousands of maritime militia members. And then, their Coast Guard ships are the largest in the world, with several hundred vessels. Some of these Coast Guard ships can reach up to 10,000 tons. It's really impressive. The white paper analyzes 3 main objectives behind China's military exercises targeting Taiwan. criticizing the Lai Ching-te administration, which is seen as having pro-Taiwan independence leanings. It aims to contain both Lai Ching-te and the United States, which is strengthening its security ties with Taiwan. First, targeting Lai Ching-te. Second, containing the United States. Third, by pursuing a hardline military approach alongside promoting stable cross-strait economic relations, they aim to divide Taiwanese society. This is the most effective tactic, dividing Taiwanese society. Meanwhile, many people in Taiwan continue to feel that unification isn't important and that there shouldn't be a war, which ends up isolating the Lai Ching-te administration. On one hand, they offer you some benefits. On the other, they intimidate you. It's the carrot and stick approach. One side is the carrot, the other is the stick, or the whip. According to the content of the Chinese military exercises around Taiwan, they include drills for invasion operations against Taiwan. For example, in Aoxa, they built a replica of the entire Taipei to simulate attacks. The military operations needed to achieve unification. On the defense side, Chinese communist officials have stated that China is rapidly increasing its military strength and intensifying military activities. The Ministry of Defense absolutely will not tolerate any unilateral change of the status quo by force. I completely believe in Japan's resolve. Japan believes that if Taiwan falls, Japan itself won't be able to hold out either. At the very least, the mainland has now raised the issue that Okinawa's status is still unsettled. It used to be a vassal state of China. Can Japan give up Okinawa? That's the question. Gen Nakatani firmly refuted this assertion, stating that China claims the Japanese self-defense forces' flights nearly caused dangerous incidents, but the self-defense forces are strictly carrying out their aerial patrols according to established regulations. In fact, these comprehensive charts clearly show precisely how these emergency incidents occurred and the concerning trends and incidents involving Japanese military aircraft being confronted. Activities near Okinawa and the Japanese mainland have seen the appearance of Chinese warships, aircraft carriers, and military aircraft. In March this year, Japan established a new Joint Operations Command to strengthen its response to gray zone and hybrid warfare, setting up this Joint Operations Command to react accordingly. Japan feels that the situation is extremely urgent, so it is ramping up its military buildup. This expansion is the reason I chose two particular stocks, though I won't reveal which ones they are here. Japan has been increasing its defense budget year by year, reaching 2% of GDP as required by NATO, and is strengthening its military ties with the United States and regional allies. The most crucial partner is Australia, which plays a key logistics role to flexibly respond to a possible Chinese attack on Taiwan. This is the summary of the white paper. Japan must cooperate with like-minded countries to counter attempts to unilaterally change the status quo through force or coercion, and should strengthen its national power and collaboration with allies. I think that right now, we absolutely need to learn from the lessons of the Russia-Ukraine war, the Iran conflict, and the Israel-Gaza war as Taiwanese people. The first point is to guard against traitors from within. The second point is to build resilience, whether it's in munitions, the power grid. You need to bury the power lines underground, fuel, ammunition, or food, how to enhance resilience so that we can keep going and sustain ourselves. You must have civil defense organizations to patrol and prevent infiltration or sudden attacks on key points. Then, use asymmetric warfare, how to deal with drones and the mass deployment of drones.